Hello, welcome to Team Brittany. It has been a while, but tonight we have Robert Murphy on with us to talk about a plethora of things, most importantly, the Bitcoin. Quite honestly, I will be the first to admit I don't know a lot about it.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I have to admit, I have limited knowledge on Bitcoin. So I have some skepticism. I'm always skeptical of any currency that doesn't have any hard assets to back it up, though. So I'm very interested to hear Mr. Murphy's thoughts on Bitcoin tonight.
Why don't we talk about that first? Because I've watched a lot of same thing, people who are skeptical about it, interviews and such online, and I heard like Tom Woods and Eric Voorhees, they were talking about it not being backed by gold, and they brought up the fact that I guess if it is backed, you could have like a counterparty risk if the company ran into problems or things like that. So yeah, that's a big question. I hear that a lot. I don't know. I'm not like an expert on it or anything. I've been reading about it a lot recently too. I think as like a libertarian, it's very intriguing that we potentially have something that cannot be touched by government. We can trade money and do things that are anonymous, not traceable, and it doesn't belong to them. It's ours. So that's kind of exciting. So yeah, what do you think, Mr. Murphy?
Okay, sure. Well, let me just say thanks for having me on, guys. So with Bitcoin, I think it's worth our time if we first just explain to your
that would be good.
what it is, because it's and not that I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I did spend like 2 years ago when it first got big in libertarian circles. I talked with this guy who had a computer that was mining it. He had to pull off the back and put a fan in there and stuff. So and he studies like cryptography theory. So I mean, he really got me. I'm not. So if I say something wrong, it's not his fault. It's my fault. But let me just give you an analogy. The best analogy I came up with at the time was, so imagine there's a community where their money is not physical. It's not gold, but it's not even pieces of green paper. It's just they use the numbers 1 through 21 million. And so what they do is they just keep track of which person in the community owns like the number 8. So like every number from 1 to 21 million is assigned to a particular person. And so if you want to go buy a car, like some guy Bill wants to go buy a car, he goes to the dealership and the dealer says that will be 2 numbers. And so Bill says, oh, you know what? I own the number 8 and the number 122 right now. So I'll transfer those to you for the car. And the guy says, okay. And then the way that actually gets recorded, the way the community acknowledges that there was a legitimate sale there is there's like a bunch of accountants standing around with giant Excel spreadsheets from, the columns are 1 to 21 million. And then every row going down keeps track of who is the current owner of that column. And so then they say, oh, Bill just gave it to Frank, the car dealer. So they put Frank's name now. So that's at the bottom of those columns of 8 and 122. And so that's the transaction. And then, but it's only like the accountants that are right there within earshot that type it into their spreadsheets. And then like the accountants next door to them, they look over their shoulder and they copy it and it propagates throughout the community. And so that's kind of like what happens with Bitcoin. And so there's no, if you say in that community, well, who keeps track of the money? Who issues it? Nobody does. It's just the accountants collectively have a history of who owned each number, and they could trace it back to when the number came into existence. And so that's the power of it. That nobody, even if half the accountants die and there's a tornado or something, it doesn't matter because those records are public knowledge. So where the cryptography comes in, it's not in the transaction. That's all in full broad daylight, and that's the power of it. It has to be. It can't just be one supercomputer keeping track of it, because then that thing could fail, or it could get corrupted, or the people running it could be evil, or the government could take it over. So there's all the transactions are public knowledge. Where the cryptography stuff comes in is how do you prove that you are actually the person that the Excel spreadsheet says is the rightful possessor of that number. And so that's where the public-private key stuff comes in. So that's kind of the big picture of how Bitcoin works. So the virtue from a libertarian point of view is like what you guys just said. It's the government can't. It's mathematically impossible almost to counterfeit it. And the other thing economically is like why maybe it would be a good thing to have in the distant future is if we ever get to a point where we have the technology, like, in Star Trek, how they just go up to the wall and say, give me a cup of Earl Grey tea, and it goes, there it is. If they ever can do that, well, then you can't have a commodity money, because you could just say, make me an ounce of gold, and it would just rearrange the molecules and make it for you. So the point is, in that sort of world, having a digital currency that's just mathematically defined, that you have built-in scarcity. So that's I've kind of just painted what it was and why ultimately maybe it would be a good thing to have that in your back pocket. Now, as we're recording this today, Bitcoin crashed 60% in 5 hours, right? The market value in terms of US dollars. So obviously, I'm not going to stick my neck out and say this is the wave of the future. We don't know. But I'm just wanting people to know the mechanics of it and what it is.
So how does it compare to the Liberty dollar and that whole thing that went a couple years ago?
Is that the one where the guy went to jail?
He went to jail, yeah. So how does it, is there a risk involved as far as...
I would have reviewed that. At the time when that happened, I asked some people if they thought that guy just got railroaded or if he was being reckless. And I heard several people say that guy was he had a bullseye on his back, that he was just doing stuff.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, he was going out of his way. And, so not that what happened to him was right, but that, a lot of people were saying, I'm not going to stick my neck out for that guy because he was kind of being foolish. But I would put it this way, it's, and this is the virtue of Bitcoin. The problem is anytime somebody came up with some idea that would supplant the US dollar, the government would come up with some reason, some pretext to crack down on them. Mm-hmm. But with Bitcoin, there's nobody in charge of it. Like, even if it took off and everyone around the world started using it, they couldn't shut it. There's no way to stop it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, because isn't Bitcoin it's essentially like a technology. So for the government to come in, they have to shut down the internet. Right,
and that's the point of that silly analogy I came up with. Is if they wanted to shut that down, if you say what's the money, and they say, well, it's the numbers 1 to 21 million, you can't get rid of the numbers. They're in your, it's the concept. You can't get rid of the concept. And then you could say, well, what if we just started wiping out the accountants, or if we started throwing them in jail? You could do that, and maybe that would get driven underground, but there'd be no one central computer you could knock out to displace it. It's just, they would just keep popping up. Kind of like, if you take down a website and then it has mirror sites, it's that kind of idea. And so that's why a lot of liberty activists rushed to it and embraced it, is because they saw if we could just get everyone to start using it, which is a big if, then it would be kind of hard to knock it down. So again, I'm not saying this is it, but I'm giving the point of view of the people and why they like it so much. I understand why they like it so much.
Well, I think it's something to be excited about, though, and at least to be, if you want to be optimistic about it, because it does, it's it's only 3 years old, have the ability to maybe, if it did take off, that's kind of exciting.
Yeah. I guess we should give a nod to the other side, though, that there is nothing physical backing it up, right? So whereas with gold and silver, historically, and that's why hard money types like them so much, is, there was an industrial use, a use in terms of jewelry and stuff. So there was some kind of tangible anchor as to why does this thing have value. But even there, once it takes off as a medium of exchange, the exchange value of gold as money is much higher than it would be if it weren't money. And so in a sense, you could say gold was in a bubble ever since it became accepted as money, and it would fall weight. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of this stuff. It's almost semantics. It depends what you want to, which way you want to come down on it.
So it's still technically fiat currency.
Yeah.
It's not backed by anything.
You're talking about Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem calling it that. In terms of what if fiat means. It's not a promise to exchange something else for it, then yeah, because it's not. It's just an abstract unit.
Right, but isn't the difference, though, it's not subject to inflation because it caps at 21 million, or I think that's the right number.
Right, yeah. Yeah, by the year 2140, it just the way the algorithms work, it levels out. So you're right, that's a good point. So yes, it is a fiat currency, but usually the reason that's a bad word is because that means, they could just print more of it.
Yeah.
Right.
No restraint. And like I said with the dumb Star Trek analogy, Bitcoin is more scarce than anything physical could possibly be, because you can't make more numbers. It's defined mathematically what its limit's going to be.
Right. So in that sense, I guess it operates like gold does, in a sense, like a digital type of gold where there's only so much of it that you can acquire.
Yeah, in terms of if the reason you like gold is because it's scarcer and has and is less liable to being counterfeited or produced en masse by the government, let's say, or even a privately issued fiat currency like the way Friedrich Hayek envisioned. If you're saying no, I like gold because hey, you got to go dig up more gold and it takes real resource, and that's what a lot and I've said that in public talks. Like that's why gold is a good money is because you can't just snap your fingers and have more of it. If that's why you like gold, well then you should love Bitcoin.
Right. That's another thing I was going to ask you too. Is what do you think? Like I saw an article on Mises.org the other day about this, but what do you think people like Hayek or Rothbard, if they were here now, what do you think they would say about Bitcoin? Do you think they would be excited about it, or do you think they would have some?
Well, they would probably disagree with each other, but I don't know.
Well, that's why I was curious. What do you think between the two of them?
Well, let me say this, since you were bringing up Austrian economists. One big objection that I've seen from specifically Austrian economists, it's this thing called the regression theorem. And so it's how Ludwig von Mises explained how is it that paper notes could have a market value. And he said, well, because historically they were tied to the precious metals, and you could trace that back to the point at which the metals were used just as regular commodities. In other words, if you're trying to give an explanation of where did money come from, the Austrians typically take it back to the days of barter when there wasn't money, and then they give a story about how it spontaneously emerged. And so a lot of Austrians have trouble with Bitcoin because they're saying we can't come up with a story like that. We can't trace Bitcoin's history back to when it was just used as a regular good. It just, from its birth, it was intended to be money, and so that gives them pause. So I don't know what Hayek or Rothbard would say, but it's if I had to guess, I would say Hayek would think it was cool and Rothbard would be skeptical if I had to guess.
Yeah. I was just curious of different Austrians if you thought there would be somebody that might be all for it, while as probably you're right, Rothbard would probably be the one who's a little more skeptical.
Yeah, but I don't think they would even use email, so I don't know if either of them would embrace it.
Right.
So then there's definitely, though, less of a chance of someone going to jail over Bitcoin as there was with the Liberty Dollar.
All right, yeah, maybe I gave you a bad answer to that. I guess the government can do a lot of stuff. So let me put it this way. I think the virtue of Bitcoin, as far as libertarianism is concerned, or just people who are skeptical of the government, is that it can't be inflated. Some people think like, oh, this is great because now I can, send payment to somebody over in Malaysia or whatever. The government won't be. And there, I was never quite sure of that aspect of it, because it seemed to me that the government could just say, if we catch any online retailers exchanging Bitcoin for real goods and services, we'll chop your head off. I mean, the government could do that, and that certainly would drive down the demand to hold Bitcoin. It's not that they could, disrupt the Bitcoin network per se, but if they made it so that, anybody who tried to get paid in Bitcoin and advertise that gets his head chopped off, well, yeah, that would put a damper in the business.
Yeah, I guess so. It would have to stay. It would only be more sustainable, I guess, in that respect, if it were like black market individuals trading with each other and not like businesses, because those would get shut down.
Yeah, but I mean, I almost think it's like the internet, though, that some people were saying, if the government could turn back the clock, they would have tried to make the internet not come into existence because, of all the ways that it hurts the government to have all these people being able to, but now they can't put the genie back in the bottle. I almost think it might be like that they're going to just say, look, this isn't worth our resources. We can just keep pumping out stuff on television, and enough people are going to watch that and do what we say, so.
Right. That's a good point.
Because, I mean, they do have limited resources. The government can't – there's all kinds of stuff they could do if they had an unlimited budget, but they don't. And so they might just – if Bitcoin really did take off, they might just say, okay, let's just figure out how we're going to tax it or something. They might just say, we can't stop it. Let's just adapt to the situation and bend this to our designs or whatever, to our advantage.
What are you talking about? Of course the government has an unlimited budget.
Well, yeah, if it's U.S. dollars, yeah.
So
So
do you?
switching. Oh, go on, Spiger. Sorry.
Oh no, I was asking Robert if he owns any Bitcoin himself.
Uh-oh, now people are going to hate. No, I don't. So,
Ooh, you're gonna be.
Just
yeah.
curious.
Let me say one other thing about that issue of that regression theorem thing. I've seen some Austrians say, we know Bitcoin can't ever take off and become the commonly accepted medium of exchange, because if it did, that would mean Mises' regression theorem is wrong, and then therefore, so they're basically making it sound like they're saying Mises' economic theory versus Bitcoin, but that's risky because really what Mises was, Bitcoin already is a medium of exchange. Some people really do give up real goods and services for Bitcoin already.
Right.
And so, there are the point, the chain of Mises' argument where it would come in would be that step. It wouldn't be once the whole world uses it. It would just be, why would anybody accept it at all? And that's already happened, where some people are using it as a medium of exchange. It's just not commonly accepted, so technically it's not money yet. So that's one little point I would make, that if people are saying that, in a sense, you already threw Mises under the bus and didn't realize it, because people really already are accepting it. They're selling real stuff to get paid in Bitcoin, not because they're going to use Bitcoin to make a sandwich with, but because they're going to trade it again. So it's already, a medium of exchange.
Switching gears a little bit. So what is your advice for us youngins in the liberty movement now? What do we do now?
Okay.
What now?
Well, let me say, in terms of economically, what. So a lot of Austrians would agree with me, and people like Peter Schiff or whatever. So the Austrian theory of what happened, and why are we in this mess right now, is because there was the dot-com crash, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then Alan Greenspan and other central bankers cut interest rates to deal with that, and that gave us the housing bubble. Right? So it didn't do the economy any favors by bringing down interest rates and pumping in a bunch of easy money. It just postponed the crisis. So then in the fall of 2008, that's when it really came to fruition, and everybody then would have said, if only we had just had the dot-com crash back in 2000, that would have been a walk in the park. So now Bernanke has done what Greenspan did, except times 100, keeping interest rates it's basically zero for much longer, and of course pumping in way more money than Greenspan did. So the point is, there's going to be a crash at some point that's going to make the '08 thing look like a walk in the park. So what does that mean? Student
loans are going to be that crash?
What's that?
You think student loans have potential to be that big?
Well, I think so, but it's more that, it's the kind of thing where it was the NASDAQ that went down in 99, 2000. It was the housing sector, and it would have been like major Wall Street investment banks that would have gone down in '08. But now the next one's coming. It's going to be governments. Like major, Spain, France, whatever. And so the central banks could do one last hurrah, but then it would be currencies. So they could say, oh, we can't let Spain fail, but then 5 years later it would be, well, we can't let the euro go down, and then 5 years ago we can't let the dollar. So they could keep pushing it back, but the problem's going to keep getting more systematic. So what do you do in that scenario? For one thing, I would get out of variable. First of all, the disclaimer: don't sue me. I'm giving hypothetical advice, not telling anyone what to do. Call your broker. I'm not a tax qualified advisor. So I would get out of variable rate debt. So I don't know if you guys have a house, maybe you don't, but people who have a mortgage that's adjustable, I would get into a fixed rate. Or if you have credit card debt, pay that off. If you got to take out a regular bank or loan that's fixed rate, to pay that off, because interest rates, I think, are going to go up at some point. I don't know when, but when this thing hits, interest rates would have to go up. And then you want to get multiple streams of income so you can save more. So, in general, that's fine advice anytime, but especially now. And when I say save more, I don't mean when you go to Starbucks, just get the plain coffee instead of the latte. I mean, go get a second or third job, get income coming in so you can really save a lot more than you are right now. So instead of assuming your income is this fixed number and then trying to reduce your expenses, make your income get bigger and then just save that. This is what I would say, because no matter what, 5 years from now, you're probably going to be doing something that you don't know right now. That you're going to have to be really nimble. And so I would get multiple little side businesses going, so if one thing dries up, you can expand the other thing, and you're not just dependent on that one paycheck.
So
Yeah.
does it matter if you're saving in a bank, though? I mean, if you're saving is that going to be a problem down the road?
Don't save in a commercial bank at all. That's
don't
crazy.
save in a bank. Okay.
So, you know, normally I would say, you know, save it in terms of physical precious metal, you know, gold and silver coins, and not like really expensive stuff that's you know, got some famous person's face on it. I mean, just like old U.S. coin, like quarters from 1940 or so. You know what I mean? Like I just go to my local coin dealer and say, give me whatever junk silver you have. You know what I mean? So it's to keep so you're just buying the closest thing to the physical metal. But then also people can recognize that. Like everyone knows what a U.S. quarter looks like, so everyone's going to be able to tell what that is and see the silver content. So that's the kind. Now, of course, you could say in Bitcoin, but that's more speculative, I would say, because it's so volatile. But yeah, that's my thing. When I say save, I don't mean in a commercial bank. I mean building up precious metals that you physically have and hide somewhere and don't tell anyone but your best friend.
So what would you suggest as far as education? Do you think if it does really go down that way, do you think it's worth it getting a master's degree or even getting a bachelor's degree at this point?
I don't think I can say something that general because it would depend on the person. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to become a doctor or a medical doctor or a professor, you have to get it. You can't just be I learned it all through books. That's just not going to work. But I think a lot of people are just assuming, well, you got to get a college degree, and not only is that going to be expensive in terms of money, but you're missing out on years of experience, and you want to get your experience now before things blow up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you don't want to be trying to get a job when unemployment is 15% officially.
Yeah. And along the same lines, I mean, what do you suggest to people with student loan debt that they be doing right now? Like paying the minimum on it?
Oh.
We see kind of where that goes, or be trying to pay them off as quickly as possible?
Again, I'm not sure. Are you saying because if you just paid the minimum and bought something else? Let me put it this way: if the choice is, I have the money and I could pay off my debts, or I'm going to just live it up because, hey, who cares? Well, then obviously paying the debt is more responsible. But if it means, well, no, I'm going to pay the minimum on this because the dollar might crash in 3 years.
Yeah, that's more so what I mean.
And so I'm going to use the money instead and go buy, an ounce of gold every 6 months or something or whatever the numbers work out to be. The latter would be smarter. But again, I hesitate to tell younger people, don't bother paying off your debts because that's kind of having debt hang over your head is just psychologically, it messes with you too. I mean,
not only that, but when you're indebted to the government, I think it's even scarier because what are they going to do if you can't pay it back? I don't know. I don't know what they're capable of doing, what they're going to implement, because nobody can pay their student loans back. It's getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's the safer advice to say to people, really think carefully before you take on a bunch of debt. Because, for example, we should separate out the notion that, if I want to get a degree, I have to go into $60,000 worth of debt. I would say pick a different school if that's what you're thinking. You know what I mean? And so, again, there could be exceptions to that, but I would say try to get out of the mentality of thinking I either have to take on a bunch of debt or not get beyond a high school degree. I think that's a false trade-off. But for the people who right now have a bunch of debt and what do they do with it? Yeah, strictly speaking, it's true to say that if it's fixed rate debt and you just have to make a certain minimum payment, if we think the dollar might crash within the next 5 years, then you should be getting into assets that appreciate in value, not just paying off this thing. But like I say, I almost hesitate to say that because then people psychologically, human nature, you're not going to probably be a robot and then go and take the exact same amount and go buy gold with it. You're probably going to go out to eat more.
Jeffrey Tucker posted a status a couple of weeks ago. Basically, people were attacking him for not being negative about the Rand Paul filibuster. Uh-huh. And he said something to the extent of, I'm not out to what did he say? I'm not out to be a saint maker. I'm also not out to go on a witch hunt. I'm for anything that creates a more limited government. That was paraphrasing. That's not exactly what he said. I'm just curious your take on that. Is working within the system worth it, or in your opinion? Obviously not.
This is a surprisingly tough interview. You're really. You guys are all smiles, but you're asking me really awkward questions. All right, okay. Well, one obvious thing is, I mean, I feel bad for Rand. No matter what Rand Paul did, there are going to be people saying he's not his dad. You know what I mean? And so that's got to be a pain. And just even growing up, that must have been somewhat annoying. So, I mean, I always feel bad for people who are the kids of famous people for that reason. I don't. I'm not into politics anyway. I mean, I actually at the Nashville was called the Music City Liberty Fest. You know, I got up there, and this was after Ron Paul had lost. You know, he didn't get the nomination, and I was saying, look at guys, I don't mean to be a party pooper, but there was no way he was ever going to be in the White House. You know, they would have made his plane crash. You know, there's no way. You know what I mean? So, in a sense, I think it's kind of I don't want to say waste of time, but I think people get way too worked up about, oh, this guy in office, and look what he said, and he's only 70% bad, you know, that kind of stuff. So Rand Paul's a lot cooler than most of the other people, but I'm not spending a lot of my time following and parsing every little thing he did.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the system is purposefully meant to weed people like that out anyway, so.
If I could just give you an anecdote, it's why I'm such a cranky old man about that stuff. So I wrote a tax proposal for the state of California, how they could reform their tax code. I don't remember how many years ago this was. And there was a guy in the state legislature that was all gung-ho about it, and he flew me out there, and I went in there and, you know, shook his hand, and he was, you know, like a standard, he was very charismatic. And that's the thing with these politicians. If you've never been I was in the room with Barney Frank, and I so much wanted him to like me. I mean,
What?
Yeah, you're shocked, right? I mean,
yes.
If I were in a bar and Bill Clinton walked in, I would be like, oh my gosh, it's Bill Clinton. I mean, and I'm being honest with you, but I'm saying you might do it too. I mean, maybe you're pure and you wouldn't, but there's a reason these guys become very powerful and they win elections is because they just have this magnetism and they just instantly can take over a room. So anyway, this guy in California was a Republican conservative. He had read my plan, and he wasn't BSing me. He really had read the thing, and he was all on board and everything. He's like, how do we do this, Dr. Murphy? This is awesome. Da, 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 da. And his chief of staff kept saying, you know, sir, this won't even get out of committee. You shouldn't bring this up because it won't get out of committee. It's just they're going to use it against you the next election. You will gain nothing. And the guy talked him out of it. And at the end of the meeting, he was like, okay, well, we'll call you, Dr. Murphy. And I never heard from him. Yeah. And his advisor wasn't, you know, a bad guy. He was telling him the truth. And so it's a kind of thing where there's even somebody who's idealistic and really means well, there's not too much he can do. Except, you know, and even Ron Paul, what his, you know, claim to fame is he always was the one guy who voted against something. So that's cool, but technically the thing passed because he was the one, you know what I mean? So it's why Ron Paul was great was because he used it as a platform to educate people, in my opinion, not that he was showing the viability of a political solution.
Yeah. Exactly, which is where my kind of frustration with Rand comes in because he seems so much more about just winning the White House, not so much on the education.
Yeah, but and you can see the, how can I put it? Like I hear the arguments of people, and they both make valid points. Like some people are saying, what's the point of winning if we have to water down our principles? But the other side says, what's the point of having our principles if we never get to implement them? If we always lose elections, it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? So I get that trade-off, and they say, you know, you guys talk about education, but unless people go and we educate people who then go vote accordingly, what's the point? So I get, you know, there's...
I guess if I thought voting did anything, then I could kind of see where the latter group was coming from, but I just don't think that voting does anything and changes anything.
Yeah, and I mean, and for me, it's partly just a cost-benefit, like, it's just not worth my time. You know, I could do a lot more myself if I do a YouTube video than if I go wait in line and then pull a lever, and I know, you know, I'm more likely to get hit by lightning on the way to the polling booth, and that my vote is going to, you know, be the decisive one. So I mean, there's always that fallback issue. But even in terms of the principle of it, if the two choices are people, you know, somebody like, there's no way I was going to vote for Romney or Obama. You know what I mean? Like, why would you do that? You know, if we're people, if somehow Ron Paul had been nominated, that would have caused me serious internal struggles. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't have been sure, should I go vote for him or not.
Yeah.
But in practice, I never have such qualms. It's always obvious that's not worth my time to go do that. Are we going to talk about karaoke, or are we saving that?
That's really, we were hoping you would just go ahead and sing for us.
Yeah, really. That's kind of what I was hoping.
That's a lot of pressure. Can we analyze, though, what you need to do to become a better karaoke singer?
Let's hear it.
All right. Because I don't screw around with this. Is serious. A lot of people think it's all a big joke, and no, it's not. All right. So number one is, you know how you think you sound so much better like in the shower than you do out in public? That's a real thing. It's because your voice is bouncing off the tiles and you're getting feedback, and so you modulate. So that's a real thing. And when you're in the car practicing, turn down the radio. You know, you have to be able to hear yourself is what I'm getting at. So that's one big thing. And when you're singing, put the microphone up almost like you're making out with the microphone, right? Like you're actually touching it to your face. It's a little bit gross if you're a germaphobe, because whatever. But
Yeah.
That's a big mistake. It's better. The worst thing in the world you can do is get up there and nobody can hear you. It's better if they can hear you and you're a little bit bad than if it's just, because they just tune you out and start drinking and ignore you. And
I love how serious he really is serious about this. Like he has a checklist.
Good.
And let me just say, I got thrown out of a little tiny karaoke bar in Sarasota, Florida, because I was not taking Bon Jovi seriously enough. And the karaoke guy was very upset with me because I was it was too much. And he kept doing solos in between everybody's karaoke performance because he was like his own American Idol.
Wow.
Pretty intense.
I don't like that when they come in, because it throws you up, because because sometimes they do it to help the person through the song.
Mm-hmm.
But like I was doing Frankie Valli's, Too Good to Be True, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, and I'm getting ready to do the finale, I love you, baby, that part. And the girl comes in. And so I'm all thrown off thinking, was it bad? Anyway, yeah, that's something that should be done very sparingly.
All right, well, do we have anything else we want to harass him about?
I don't think so. Just we appreciate you coming on and, come back.
Okay,
More.
thanks, guys.